Hi everyone, in this video I am going to demonstrate how I read a paper using the new Pro features of RemNote. These are the timestamps for the video. Feel free to jump to the parts that interest you most. RemNote is a note-taking tool with linking capabilities that maximizes the value of notes. I've covered it in several of my videos. I recommend watching the RemNote workflow playlist to get a better understanding of why I choose to use it as my primary tool for academic research. Now let's get started with our reading session. So the first thing here that I'm going to do is grab the citation from Zotero. This is the citation that I'm going to be using. I will right click on it and show the file. Here is the file. I'm going to my reference library, as you can see here. This is where I have all my references. And I am going to create a new folder. I'm going to add the source. And as you can see, the file is now on the right hand pane. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this automated title. I am going to go back to Zotero. I'm going to grab the citation key. And I'm going to place that as the title of my document. Now I'm going to start adding the metadata. Here I have a template. It starts with the citation. From here, I am going to left click on the paper, create bibliography from item, choose the RemNote metadata. Output mode is bibliography, copy to clipboard and press OK. Now I'm back at RemNote. I will paste it and now I have the authors, the date, the publication and everything. I'll add a few keywords. I know that this paper is related to tensors, so I'm going to add tensor as a tag for it. I also have another link for probabilistic models. Next, for the context, I know that this paper was cited somewhere, but I'm not sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through my reference library, and this will pull up all my references. And then here I'm going to search for the title of this paper, and this is going to bring up this current file because I have the title over here. But as you can see, it also pulled up this rem that shows that I mentioned this paper somewhere in another paper related to future trends, and I can see it here. So now I can link to this. As you can see, now I have a link to that rem that includes the citation. However, I do not want this to show this way. So what I'm going to do is I am going to click on this and then it's going to give me a menu. I'm going to add an alias here from this option. Now I can type the alias that I want, but a cool feature here is if I delete all of this text and then press enter, I will get a pin, and this pin will link to that location. It was cited here. And if I click on this link, I will go to the location where it was cited in the other paper. This paper isn't related to any specific group that I'm familiar with. In terms of project, this is going to be related to a project that I'm working on. And in terms of articles, I can link to that specific article that we just found. For the reading status, I'm going to add read, as I'm going to read it right now. So before I begin reading this paper, I'm going to go over the new features from RemNote Pro that are related to PDF highlighting. Here I have the PDF on my right. For some reason, I think it's related to my CSS, my custom CSS, but I cannot see these icons up here. But here we have zoom in icons, search icon, and I'll get to these two later. So first I'm going to zoom in a little bit to get a more focused view. Now, there are two ways of highlighting in RemNote. The first way is to highlight normally, like this. And this will create a text excerpt, which you can then copy with Control-C. As you can see here, we have two options. We can either press Control-C to copy as text, or to press Enter, which will create a pin like this one. So for example, if I press Control-C and paste somewhere here on the left pane, you can see now that I have a transcription of the text on the right. And if I otherwise would have pressed enter, which I can also click on this excerpt and get this menu. If I click on the pin, this will copy the rem reference as a pin. And then I can also paste it on the left pane as a pin. I can also delete the excerpt by clicking on the highlight and pressing this X. This will remove it. As you can see here, now I have a missing rem because of this deletion. The second way to create highlights is to press Control, and I'm going to use a figure to illustrate this. So let's see if we can find a figure in this paper. Here's one. So by holding Control and then clicking, I can drag and create a box, and now I have the same options. I can either press Enter or Control C to create a link, which will show an image in this case, or Enter to create a pen. So let's press Control C. And now if I paste on the left hand pane, now I have an image. Again, we can click on this, press the pin to copy the pin instead, and now we have the image linked as a pin. So we can see the image only if we hover on this pin. Now if I wanted to see all the highlights that I've had on this page, I can simply click on this button here, which says View Highlights. Once I click on it, I'll see a page that has all the highlights. So this is the abstract highlight that I made, and this is the image. I can go back to the PDF by clicking again on this, which will show View PDF this time. So the cool thing about these highlights and links is that suppose I'm here on this page. I have this pin that links to the abstract. So if I click on this pin, it will bring me to that abstract immediately in the PDF. And this is the case even if this PDF is closed. So if this is somewhere in my database, this link, I can see it for one when I hover on it because it's a pin. But also if I click on it, it will immediately show the PDF and the location of this highlight, which is amazing because I can now see the context of this highlight. This allows you to be more deliberate when highlighting, just for the sake of not going back to the source material. Now, with how easy it is to go back to the source material and see the context, you can only highlight the really important parts. Now, there's one more thing that I'm going to do before beginning my reading session, which is I'm going to go back into the page with all the highlights. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a portal to this page in the left-hand pane. And so by clicking on the left-hand pane and pressing Control-Shift-Enter, I'm going to be creating a portal. And then I'm going to search for the name of this page, which is this shown here. And I found it. And so I'm going to press on it. And as we can see, now we have a portal to it. I'm going to expand it. And as we can see, we have page 1 and page 3, the locations of the highlights. And the reason I'm having this window into these highlights is that once I'm taking my notes over here, I don't want to be going back and forth between the PDF view and the highlight view. Now I'll go back to the PDF so we can start our note-taking session. But first, I'm going to delete all these excerpts so that we can start from scratch. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to bring up the template for my notes. So this is the excerpt template. And this is where I organize the highlight information as abstract, introduction, things related to literature review, things related to methodology, experiments, results, and conclusion. So I'll begin with highlighting the abstract, and I'll press Control C, and you can immediately see that we have it here on the left-hand pane created. And then what I like to do is to go over this abstract and pick up keywords that I need. Here I've found a link to Tucker decomposition. So I'm going to link to it, but it was Tucker before, so I'm going to alias it with Tucker. So now I have one place for both of these. So if I go to Tucker, I can see that Tucker decomposition has the following aliases. So the one that I just made, Tucker. And these are the references that mention either one of these two. Now that I'm done linking, I will go ahead and copy the reference of this link. And we have a hotkey for that, Control-Shift-R. And I'm going to paste it into my abstract. So now if I close this PDF and then I click on this abstract, I will immediately go to that part. Next, we have a few keywords here, and I'm going to include these keywords in the keyword section. So here we have tensor factorization, which I have tensor decomposition. There are two terms to describe the same thing. So I'm going to have tensor decomposition, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to alias it with tensor factorization. And now if I hover over tensor factorization, I can see that it's an alias to tensor decomposition. Once I'm done adding the keywords, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a highlight. And this time I'm going to create just a pin and add that to the keywords over here, so that I can always go to this location or see other keywords that I did not choose to add. Now I'm off to the introduction. Here the author kind of lumps the introduction with the literature review, and so I'm going to jump back and forth as I see where the information fits. Right off the bat, I can see that the author is mentioning a couple of matrix factorization techniques, and he references two papers. And so what I'm going to do is first I'm going to create an excerpt for this, and then I'm going to jump to the reference section and see if I'm interested in these two specific references, which are 10 and 15. Here are references 10 and 15. Now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to create an excerpt for both of them, and I'm going to add them to a to read list since I think they may be interesting. Now if I go to the left hand pane, I can see that in this first page I have the excerpt on the matrix factorization techniques, and I can also see that we have another page added, page 8, which has the list of references, and we can see reference 10 and 15. First, I'm going to link whatever techniques here that I have to my database, and if I don't have them, then I'm going to create new ones for them. And here we have matrix factorization, which I already linked before, so I'm not going to make a lot of redundant linking. So here we have clustering, which is something that I'm going to link. Now this is something that a lot of times bothers me when reading papers. It's when the authors assume that the reader knows whatever these abbreviations are, and in this case I do, but you have to be aware that not necessarily all the readers come from the same background that you come from, and this may not be their field of expertise, and so it's always good practice to have the full unabbreviated title and then have the abbreviation after that in parentheses. I find it good practice to set the full name as the main one and then alias all the abbreviations. And the reason is sometimes abbreviations get repeated and they refer to different concepts. And so having the concepts as the full term and then having the abbreviations as the aliases, first I'm going to create the full alias or full term, which is in this case independent component analysis. So here I'm going to click on this, I'm going to add an alias, and then I'm going to write out ICA. Now if I hover over ICA, I can see that it's related to independent component analysis, or it's an alias for that. Now that I'm done with all the linking, what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-R to copy the rem reference. I'm going to go up here in the introduction, or probably in the literature review, and add this. And then I'm going to nest underneath it the references to the citations. So here I'm going to Ctrl-Shift-R again. Go up here, nest this one, Ctrl-Shift-R, and nest the other one. So now whenever I'm looking at this rem that mentions all these different methods for matrix factorization techniques, I can immediately see the references related to it. Now, if I click back on this, it will bring me back up to where I was reading before I went to the reference section, and I can continue my reading session. So here it mentions that if I wanted to get more information, I can look at a few review papers, specifically 9 and 1 in these citations. So what I'm going to do is here in the literature review, I'm going to add a note to find out more. Go to, and then I'm going to add those 2 citations. Now the interesting part is that I recognize one of these, which is this one, and I believe that I've read it before. And so what I'm going to do is, before adding that excerpt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for it. So I'm going to use the authors to find that paper, because that's usually within the citation key. I'm going to open up the bracket. I'm going to search my reference library, press tab to pull up all my references. All my citation keys starts with @ so that's why I do that, so that I can easily search my citation keys. And then I'm going to input the author name, and immediately I found it. So it's the first one that I have here. I'll press enter, and that will create a link to that paper. Now I don't have the other one in my database, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, Control-C to copy the reference of this rem, and then paste it here. And now I have a link to that too. Here's an important paragraph. It starts with the motivation behind this work. And so I'm going to quickly outline that, copy it, and put it into my notes. And from what I've read, I think this is pretty ambitious. So I'm going to note that as a comment. Next, they mentioned that they base their notation on a paper on graphical models. So I'm going to also extract this so that if I find anything confusing, I can go back to the original paper, which may have a little bit more explanation. Then I'm going to add the citation of it as a pin. So it's number 7. I'm going to copy this and add it as a pin. The next part here is also very important because it's where the authors describe their contribution. And so I'm going to copy this, and in my excerpt, I'm going to tag it with contribution. I'm also going to tag the motivation with motivation as well. And these universal descriptors, I have them shown here in pink. So if I go into that page, this is the page of my universal descriptors. So they all start with a tick, and they all describe different parts of a paper. For example, the abstract, definition, future direction, motivation, the algorithm, and so on. Another important thing that the authors mention is that their work is a generalization of another work. And so I'm also going to copy this excerpt, going to paste it here, and then I am going to add pins for these 2 sources. Now that I'm done with the introduction, I am going to move on. However, I am going to skip through until the results. So here is the discussion section. So in this part here, the authors discussed the main way that they were able to save time given their framework. So I copied the excerpt in the results and discussion section, and I tagged it here with computational savings, and I have it as a contribution of this paper. Furthermore, the authors here indicate some limitation to the work related to model selection. And when you are creating a highlight that spans across a page like this, what I like to do is I'll go to the location of that highlight, which is here in page 7, and I am going to remove this 8 and the name of the paper. So this part right here, I'm going to remove that from the excerpt to fix the excerpt and paste it in my discussion section, and I am going to tag it with limitation. I also noticed that the author refers to a specific equation here, equation 26, that affects the time saving specifically. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to equation 26 and I'm going to copy this pin and I'm going to pin it to the saving section so that when I look at the saving and the contribution, I can have a look at the equation that helped with that. Now that I have a good idea of the contents of the paper, I can go ahead and look at the methodology. This is the most technical part of the paper, so I'm just going to give a high-level demonstration of what I would be interested in. So basically, when looking at the methodology, I will be looking for key points in the methodology, key contributions. I will also grab the notations as well as any figures that I find interesting. So right here, this is the main equation or the main problem formulation that the authors are trying to solve. And so I am going to highlight that. And actually this time I am going to copy it, but I'm going to change the color of this excerpt since it is the main problem. Let's go with red. And now most likely I'm not going to make sense of it on its own because of all the notation. And so I will be copying the rest of this explanation. I'm using the figure highlight here because as you can see, if I just take the excerpt as text, you can see how the math doesn't translate very well. And so this is why with math, I just tend to take the highlight as an image. So here is an interesting figure that relates all the different variables together. This is going to be very helpful for me to have a general understanding of how these variables relate to each other. So I am just going to take the highlight as an image and I'll copy that into my notes. Now here the authors present the probabilistic model, and so I'm going to highlight this model, copy it into my excerpts, and then indent underneath it all this notation. Again, I'm going to use an image because of the math, and I am going to tag this with notation. Now here the authors present the algorithm that we can code to implement their methodology. So I'm going to copy this because this is some key information that I can later use if I want to implement this method. And I am going to tag it with algorithm. This is another one of the tick tags that I have. Now that I'm done with highlighting all the important ideas within this paper, I am going to start my review session. So I'm done with the reading session and I'm going to start the review session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to input the template for the review. And I have it here as review question template. And as you can see, now I have a lot of review questions to go over. And this is from the previous video that I had on how to do literature review. I decided to split this up into two videos. So this video will be only on the highlighting part, and next video I'm going to go over the review questions and how I go about answering them. And I will probably use another paper where I can go over all of these questions. That's all I have today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.